The day my daughter locked me away didn't come with thunder or warning. No shattering glass, no shouting matches. Just a soft knock on my bedroom door, a tray of tea I didn't ask for, and the gentle rustle of papers being slipped into a leather folder. That was the sound of my life folding in on itself. I suppose betrayals and old age don't always wear black or carry knives. Sometimes they come dressed in pearl earrings, whispering assurances in the voice you once read bedtime stories to. It wasn't the loss of my home that hurt the most, or my name, stripped from every document. It was that she did it while holding my hand, while calling me mama like she hadn't already decided I was in the way. My name is Marjorie Vane. Once, I ran a house so grand it echoed with laughter and legacy. People used to ask me for advice on manners, investments, even the proper way to fold a linen napkin. But those days are gone. Now they call me confused, delusional, dangerous even. They say I'm too old to understand what's best for me. But let me tell you a secret. When they stop listening to you, that's when you learn who they really are. And once you see the truth, you don't forget it. You wait. You gather. You remember every word, every whisper, every signature they didn't think you'd notice. And then, when the time is right, you strike. This is not the story of a helpless old woman. It's the story of what happens when the woman they tried to bury decides to dig herself out. They told me it was for my safety, those soft-voiced professionals in beige scrubs, speaking in rehearsed sympathy while guiding me into a room that didn't have a single window. They told me it was for my safety, those well-trained caretakers with polished smiles and sympathetic eyes. One of them was named Clarice, though I only learned that because it was sewn into her chest pocket. She spoke softly, as if any volume above a whisper might break me. "You'll be comfortable here, Mrs. Vane. Everything you need is right inside." She smiled in that sad way young people do when they think they're being kind to the elderly. Behind her stood Eloise, my daughter, clutching her handbag too tightly, like a child afraid she'd dropped something precious. And in a way, she had. Me. I hadn't asked to come here. I hadn't packed a bag. I hadn't been given a choice. I was told we were going for a drive, just to get some air, maybe lunch near the lake where Edward used to take me when the children were small. But the trees that passed the window were foreign, looming in ways I couldn't quite place, their shadows long and trembling across the road like fingers reaching for something just out of sight. By the time I realized we weren't anywhere near the lake, we were already pulling into a long gravel driveway that led to a building with stone walls and no signage. Just glass doors and clipped hedges. Too neat. Too curated. Like everything here had been designed to appear safe. The room they led me to had no windows, only a small frosted pane in the door, the kind that let in light but not the truth. The walls were painted a calming shade of blue, the sort used in waiting rooms and dentist offices. There was a bookshelf filled with pre-selected novels I didn't ask for, and a cushioned armchair facing a muted television that played some forgettable daytime program. What struck me first was the silence. And then I noticed it. There were no clocks. Not on the wall, not on the nightstand. Not even the soft tick of a wristwatch on Clarice's arm. Nothing to measure time. No way to track how long I'd been here, or how long they planned to keep me. Eloise stepped forward and kissed my forehead, like she used to when I had migraines. I flinched, not visibly, but inside, where all the betrayals echo. "Just for a while, Mama," she murmured, brushing my shoulder with a hand that once clung to mine in fear of thunderstorms. "You need rest." After everything, her words trailed off, deliberately vague. "The doctors think this will help." Then she turned to Clarice. "If she gets agitated, just remind her she's not in danger. She tends to spiral when she's overwhelmed." Clarice nodded without hesitation. Eloise had clearly rehearsed that line. That was the moment I realized she had been planning this for longer than I dared admit. They both left the room without another word. The door clicked softly behind them. I sat in the chair and didn't move. The silence thickened. I tried to listen for birds, wind, cars, anything, but the only sound was the faint hum of the air vent in the ceiling. I don't know how long I sat there. It could have been an hour. Could have been 3. But I started to wonder, how do they expect you to trust your mind when they strip away every marker of time and identity? When I stood to examine the bookshelf, I noticed something strange. All the books were new. No creases, no marginalia, no smell of pages turned too many times. They weren't meant to be read. They were decor. Props in a room designed not for living, but for keeping. I opened the dresser drawers. Empty. The closet held only 2 identical robes and 3 plastic hangers. There was no mirror. I suppose they didn't want me to see myself. Not in the way I used to anyway. Because if I saw myself, truly saw myself, I might remember that I wasn't always someone to be locked away. I sat back down. I folded my hands. And I waited. They think that old age makes you docile. That gray hair and stiff joints mean your fire has gone out. But I've learned something about silence over the years. It doesn't mean surrender. Sometimes it means strategy. Because while Eloise was outside, reshaping my life with signatures and quiet lies, she forgot the most important thing about her mother. I remember everything. The second morning, I believe it was morning, though without a clock or sun I couldn't be sure, I awoke to the scent of lavender. It wasn't real lavender, not the kind from the fields Edward and I once walked through in Provence. This was synthetic, pumped in discreetly through a vent near the ceiling. Calming, they would say. Soothing for the nerves. But to me, it was the smell of forced forgetting. A floral fog meant to dull the senses, to make you feel safe in a place that had already stripped you of your name. A woman named Brenda brought in my breakfast. Oatmeal. No salt, no sugar. Warm, but bland. Like everything here. She asked me how I slept. I told her I don't answer questions that come with a pre-approved smile. She chuckled, the way you do when a child says something unexpected. Then she placed a small cup of tea beside my tray, chamomile of course, and reminded me to take the pill left on the napkin. It's just to help with balance, Mrs. Vane, she said, though I hadn't stumbled once since arriving. I didn't take it. I tucked it beneath my sleeve and watched her leave. The pills. The lavender. The cheerful, detached voices. I was being managed. That much was clear. But what they didn't seem to realize, what Eloise clearly underestimated, was that I hadn't been a passive woman in 50 years. I had once managed the Vane estate, kept its affairs quiet and polished, made sure no scandal ever touched our doorstep. I had seen forged checks, intercepted desperate letters from mistresses, and sat in boardrooms where men assumed I didn't understand the numbers. And through it all, I had kept ledgers. Neat, detailed, meticulous ledgers. I still kept them. Even here, in this strange, quiet place. They didn't check the lining of my handbag when I arrived. That was their first mistake. Inside, folded between tissues and a satin glove, was a single page from my last ledger, my handwriting, my shorthand, my proof. I hadn't had time to bring more. But it was the page I knew Eloise would try to erase, the trust transfer from Edward's account, dated 2 weeks before his stroke. His signature, shaky but his own, declaring that the majority of his estate would go not to Eloise, but to me. Not as charity, but recognition. Because I had kept the empire standing when he was too tired to lift a pen. That paper, that single sheet, was enough to start unraveling the lie Eloise had built. I kept it beneath the mattress now, wrapped in a page torn from Wuthering Heights. The irony amused me, mad women in locked rooms. At least I was in good company. That afternoon, Clarice returned. She sat across from me with a notebook she didn't write in. "How are we feeling today, Marjorie?" she asked, her tone syrupy and professional. "I imagine about the same as any woman who's been kidnapped by her daughter," I replied evenly. She blinked, smiled, and crossed one leg over the other. "Your daughter said you might be experiencing some distortions. She told us about your confusion regarding the will and the estate." I laughed softly. "Of course she did. Is there anything you'd like to clarify?" I leaned forward. "Yes," I said. "Let her know I still remember where the second copy of the trust document is. and no amount of lavender is going to make me forget. Clarice's smile didn't falter, but her eyes did something strange, just for a flicker. She wasn't sure whether to dismiss me or report me. I had struck a nerve. That was enough for now. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, breathing in that artificial calm, clutching the proof beneath my bed. Eloise had taken my house, my name, and, if she had her way, my legacy. But she hadn't taken my mind. And I still had time, even if they refused to let me measure it. On what I assumed was the third day, I began testing the walls. Not the literal ones. I'd already tapped on the plaster, run my fingers along every seam, even examined the corners for cameras. The room was designed to look free of surveillance, but I wasn't naive. These places rarely trust their guests, especially the ones labeled with words like erratic or incompetent. No, I was testing the human walls, the staff, the routines, the fragile confidence of people hired to keep order with a smile. I started with Brenda, the oatmeal girl. "Tell me," I asked casually as she laid down my tray, "how long have you worked here?" "Oh, a while now," she said, brushing non-existent crumbs from the napkin. 3 years next spring. That long? I raised my brows, feigning admiration. "You must have known quite a few guests by now." She laughed. "Residents, ma'am." "Of course. Residents." I looked her squarely in the eye. "And how many of them had family that lied to get them in?" She blinked, just a fraction too long. "We don't get involved in family business, ma'am. We just provide care." Ah, there it was. A chink in the armor. After she left, I sat in my armchair and studied the edges of the television screen, the ventilation panel above the bookshelf, the locked drawer on the side table. I noted everything. I had nothing but time, after all, and while they thought they'd taken away my power, they'd made a critical error. They'd left me with my mind. And a woman with her mind intact is never truly defenseless. Later that day, I asked Clarice for writing materials. "For journaling," I said. "My therapist used to recommend it." She hesitated only briefly before returning with a composition book and a pen. No staples, no metal rings. The pen was capped plastic, soft and pliable. Childproof, like everything here. That night, I wrote a letter. Not a desperate plea, not a complaint. A document. A record. I wrote about the trust, about Edward's instructions, about the missing original will. I wrote in the same voice I had used when I corresponded with estate attorneys, measured, detailed, unemotional. I listed names, dates, transfers. I even included the notary's name, the one Eloise had conveniently forgotten to mention in her version of events. I folded the letter neatly, tucked it inside the composition book, and waited. The next morning, I asked Clarice if the facility could mail something on my behalf. "Just to my lawyer," I said. "He'll want to know I'm adjusting." Her smile tightened. "We typically review all outgoing communications, Mrs. Vane." "Of course," I said, offering the most innocent smile I could summon. "You can read it. In fact, I want you to. It's nothing scandalous." That got her attention. She took the notebook. Hours passed. I didn't eat. I didn't speak. I sat in that chair and waited for the shift change. Clarice didn't return that evening. A different woman did. She didn't introduce herself. She simply delivered dinner and left without a word. That was when I knew they'd read it. That was when I knew they were afraid. The following morning, I awoke to find a new blanket on my bed, soft, pink, frilled around the edges. Comforting, childish. A quiet message: compliance would be rewarded. I smiled. They were trying to soothe me again, like I was a child throwing tantrums instead of a woman digging up the truth. But I didn't need their comfort. I needed a second envelope. I had a plan now. I just had to move carefully. Because if I played my hand too soon, Eloise might win. And if I waited too long, they might find the ledger page still hidden beneath my mattress. There was a garden I wasn't meant to see. Not a grand thing, Just a courtyard tucked between the east and west wings of the building, surrounded by ivy-streaked walls and shaded by one large birch tree. I caught my first glimpse of it through the frosted glass near the end of the corridor. The glass wasn't meant to be clear, but if you leaned just right and the light hit at the right angle, the blur would shift just enough to hint at color, green leaves, brick paths, movement. And on that third morning, maybe the fourth, I saw him. A man seated on the bench beneath the birch tree. Thin, upright, still, his face turned slightly toward the sky, as though he were listening for something long gone. I watched him for less than a minute before a nurse noticed and gently guided me away with a rehearsed line about restful routines. That, of course, only deepened my curiosity. I began timing my walks. I asked to be escorted at specific intervals, claiming mild nausea that passed when I moved. The nurses obliged, hesitantly. I took slow steps, always turning left at the end of the hall, always pausing briefly near the frosted window to catch another glimpse. He was there every time. Same bench, same posture, and he always wore a gray cardigan, one size too large. I wondered who he was. It took 4 days of gentle persistence and a carefully orchestrated episode of dizziness near the door before I earned access to the garden. Clarice herself escorted me. 10 minutes of sun, she said, glancing at her watch. Then back to your room. The sun felt foreign on my face. Too warm, too honest. I walked slowly along the path, noting every detail. The fountain in the corner, drained and dry. The potted rosemary near the gate. And finally, the man on the bench. He turned to look at me before I reached him. His eyes were pale, watery, not from age, but from something deeper, grief, perhaps. Or understanding. He nodded once, like he'd been expecting me. I sat beside him without asking. My knees ached, but I masked it with poise. We sat in silence for nearly a minute before I spoke. They don't like it when we talk, do they? He chuckled softly, without humor. They prefer we forget how. Do you know why you're here? I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Then, because my daughter is tired of pretending I'm useful. I turned toward him. What's your name? He hesitated. Wendell. Marjorie. He smiled faintly. I know. I blinked. You know. He nodded toward the building. This place listens more than it speaks. But not well enough. Word gets around. I studied him more closely now. He wasn't broken. He was waiting like me. Sharp in the eyes. Careful in posture. I realized then that Wendell wasn't here for confusion or illness. He was here for convenience. You're not like the others, I said. He leaned in ever so slightly. Neither are you. The moment sat between us, heavy and quiet. Then he slipped something from his sleeve and handed it to me beneath the cover of his coat. A folded scrap of paper, old and faded. I opened it after dinner, once I was alone. It was a map, not of the outside, but the inside. The facility. Rooms. Staff quarters. Storage closets. Ventilation routes. And in the margin, a note in tight, deliberate script. If you're serious, I can help. But you'll need more than memory to win. You'll need evidence. Real evidence. Wendell wasn't just another forgotten man. He was an insider. A quiet witness. And now, perhaps, an accomplice. Eloise had built a world she believed I could never escape. But she'd made a critical mistake. She forgot I was not the only one she underestimated. Wendell didn't meet me in the garden the next day. I sat on the bench for 13 minutes under the pretense of sun exposure, hands folded in my lap, pretending to enjoy the breeze. A nurse checked on me twice. Clarice peered from a hallway window once. I didn't flinch. I knew better than to appear expectant. Anticipation reveals intent, and intent is dangerous in a place like this. It wasn't until I returned to my room that I found his message. Folded inside the lining of the new pink blanket, clever, almost sentimental in its placement, was another scrap of paper. This one had no map. Just a sentence. Storage room B6. Tonight, 2 a.m. Bring the ledger page. B6. I hadn't seen that name on any public door. But Wendell had a map. And if I wanted to get out of this place with more than just memories and suspicions, I'd need more than accusations and one trust document. I'd need paper trails, records, signatures, anything that proved I wasn't the one who'd gone mad. That evening, I faked sleep as I had when Eloise was young and frightened of the dark. Soft breathing, still body. One arm draped out from under the blanket to show I wasn't clinging to anything. After the last hallway light dimmed and the security shift rotated, I slipped out of bed, heart hammering against ribs that had grown too sharp in recent months. The hallway was cold and lit only by emergency track lights that hummed faintly as I crept barefoot across the linoleum. I didn't bother with shoes, too noisy. The hospital socks were quiet enough. I carried the page in a sealed plastic sleeve tucked into my waistband. My only proof. My tether to who I used to be. Finding B6 was easy. Getting into it was harder. The door was marked plainly. Storage. Staff only. No cameras. Just a keypad lock and a faded clipboard with inventory logs. I waited. 2 minutes. 3. Then Wendell appeared, like smoke out of the dark. He didn't greet me. Didn't smile. Just typed 4 digits into the keypad. The door clicked open. Inside, the room was lined with steel cabinets and outdated file boxes, some dating back decades. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The smell was mildew and aging ink. I was the CFO of a chain of private rehab clinics, Wendell said softly, guiding me to the far wall. They moved me here after my daughter filed a petition claiming early-stage dementia. I did the books for places like this. I know where they bury the secrets. He knelt before a drawer labeled intake, legal/financial, and began flipping through folders like a man who'd done it 100 times. What are we looking for? I asked, keeping watch near the door. Proof of financial reassignments. Guardianship filings. Medical statements signed without consent. Anything that shows they altered your legal standing. 10 minutes passed. 20. Then he stopped. He handed me a folder labeled Vane, Marjorie, special notes. Inside were photocopies of medical declarations. One was signed by a doctor I had never met. Another was a psychiatric recommendation citing emerging paranoia based solely on a concerned family report. Eloise's name was on it. But there was something worse, something colder. An amendment, dated just 1 day before my arrival here, that transferred temporary financial authority over the estate to Eloise M. Vane, citing reduced mental capacity and failure to comply with recommended medication. She used this place, I whispered, turning the pages with shaking fingers. She used their system to cut me out legally. And they let her. Wendell didn't nod. He didn't have to. Because in that moment, I realized this wasn't just betrayal. It was theft. Premeditated, paper-backed, and stamped with authority. And if they'd done it to me, they'd done it to others. Wendell had said it best. This place listens more than it speaks. But now we had something to make it scream. I didn't sleep that night. Not after what I saw in that folder. I sat in my chair with the blanket wrapped around me, not for warmth, but for comfort. A comfort I didn't have in years, not since Edward passed and Eloise started treating me like a delicate vase slowly cracking in the sun. She'd been planning this long before the doctors, long before the staged confusion and missing appointments. That folder proved it. My daughter, my only child, had orchestrated a quiet coup, and the world, polite and blind, had nodded along. But the fire inside me wasn't just about revenge. It was about principle. It was about every older woman they'd locked away with lavender and lies. And now that I had the truth in my hands, I knew what I had to do. I needed a voice. One they couldn't mute. The facility was equipped with what they called the community room, a sterile name for a beige lounge lined with armchairs and old jigsaw puzzles. It had a TV, a coffee machine, and most importantly, a landline phone mounted on the far wall behind the staff desk. It was meant for supervised family calls. Nothing long, nothing unsupervised. But Wendell had told me something interesting on our way back from the archive room. The phone line runs through a shared junction box. At night, when they do their systems backup, there's a 15-minute window where it shifts from monitored to passive mode. If you're fast and you know who to call, I knew. I had memorized the number years ago, long before Eloise had tried to digitize my life into forgetfulness. Walter Finch, Edward's oldest partner and our family's most persistent legal watchdog. He was the one man Eloise hadn't been able to charm or manipulate, because he'd seen her growing ambition and her quiet cruelty long before I ever dared admit it. I just needed access. The plan began the next day. I started asking to visit the community room regularly. Just for stimulation, I said. The walls are starting to feel a bit close. Clarice approved the request. 1 hour in the afternoon, supervised, of course. But supervision could be bent. Staff were overworked, and predictability was a weapon if you wielded it right. For 4 days, I followed the routine. Crossword puzzles, bad coffee, idle chatter with residents who no longer remembered their grandchildren's names. I let them see me as harmless, as faded, as tired. Then, on the 5th day, I moved. It was 9:12 p.m. The halls were quiet. The nurses had just finished rounds. I slipped out with a sweater draped over one arm and my walker clattering softly in front of me. The staff was used to these late-night wanderings now. Marjorie just needs to settle. She gets restless. Poor thing. I made it to the community room in less than 3 minutes. The phone was there, unattended. I picked it up with hands that didn't shake. 1 ring. 2. Then a 3rd. Finch and Groves, came the answer. Crisp. Polite. "This is Marjorie Vane," I said calmly. "Don't interrupt. Don't ask if I'm all right. Just listen. I have exactly 13 minutes. The pause was brief but telling. Then, "Yes, ma'am." I told him everything. The trust transfer. The falsified documents. The forged psychiatric statements. I told him where the originals were hidden, who signed them, and when. I told him about Wendell and about the others I'd overheard whose names were on similar legal forms without their knowing. "I need you to act quickly," I said, finishing with a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "Before they find the page. Before she finds me uncooperative again." He didn't ask if I was confused. He didn't ask for proof. He simply said, "It's already begun, Marjorie. I received a digital alert 5 days ago from the notary archive. Something about your trust being legally voided. I've been waiting for you to reach out. I just didn't know how long you had left." I hung up the phone with shaking fingers. Wendell was right. The walls here weren't solid. You just had to know where to press. It happened the morning after the call. Brenda didn't bring the oatmeal. Instead, a new nurse arrived. Young, fresh-faced. No name badge. No chatter. She carried a tray with toast, tea, and 2 pills. One was the usual, small, pale, unassuming. The other was new, larger, coated in something that glistened faintly under the light. "What's this one?" I asked, pointing with my fork. She smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "Doctor's orders. A mild stabilizer, just to help balance your emotions. It'll help ease the strain." "Strain," I repeated, voice flat. "Your daughter approved it. She said you've been under stress." "That you've been," she hesitated, too trained to say the word, but still letting it hang, unpredictable. "I didn't take the pills." I palmed them, wrapped them in a tissue, and tucked them into my sweaters lining the moment she turned to adjust the blinds. But the message was clear. Someone knew. Maybe not everything. Maybe not the call. But something had shifted. My schedule changed. The garden was now under maintenance. No more daily walks. The community room was reserved for a therapy group. No phone access. The hallway lights no longer dimmed at night. They stayed sharp and white, buzzing slightly louder, impossible to sleep beneath. They were turning the screws. Wendell was nowhere to be seen for 2 days. No notes. No signals. No updates. I feared the worst. I imagined him caught in the records room, led quietly away and sedated into silence. They had means here: drugs, paperwork, isolation. It wouldn't take much. Just a signature. Just a justification. It was all so easy when the victim was over 70 and branded with the word fragile. By the third morning, I requested a meeting with Clarice. I feel off, I said, clutching my arms like a woman losing herself. Foggy. Not myself. I want to talk to someone about adjusting my medication. She smiled, reassured. I think that's a great step, Marjorie. I was ushered into a small room with soft lighting and a single potted fern. The windows were fake. Just light boxes with shifting hues of blue. Dr. Trent greeted me. Late 40s. Glasses with clean frames. The kind of man who'd made a career out of writing patients out of their own stories. He listened as I lied. I think I've been imagining things, I told him, voice frail and uncertain. I keep thinking people are hiding things from me. Even my daughter. It's like I'm living in two versions of reality. He nodded, scribbling. That must be exhausting. It is, I whispered. But I want to get better. I really do. He prescribed a new dosage. Twice daily. I nodded obediently, folding the paper and slipping it into my sleeve where the tissue with the pills still sat. When I returned to my room, there was a note on my pillow. Folded twice. Thin. Hidden beneath the pink blanket like before. There's a way out. But it won't be quiet. When you're ready to break the whole thing, come to the kitchen hallway. 3rd floor. Service entrance. Midnight. It wasn't signed, but I knew Wendell's writing. Shaky, upright, deliberate. They had tried to isolate me. They had tried to medicate me. They had even tried to rewrite my mind. But they had forgotten something I would never let go of. I am Marjorie Vane. I kept the empire running. I buried my husband's secrets. I navigated backroom deals and ballroom betrayals. And I am not going down in a robe and slippers. Midnight was coming. And this time, I wasn't asking permission to leave. I had almost forgotten what fear felt like. Real fear. Not the lingering dread of being dismissed or the quiet ache of watching your reflection fade in the eyes of someone you love. I'm talking about the cold, ancient kind that slips into your bones and whispers, if you take another step, you may never come back. That's how I felt as I climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. Midnight came slowly. I sat dressed and waiting in my chair for 2 hours, fully clothed beneath my robe, with the pink blanket folded neatly on my bed, a signal that, if things went badly, would tell Clarice something had changed. I didn't know why I bothered. Maybe part of me still hoped someone in this place had a soul. The stairwell smelled of bleach and cold metal. My hands shook as I gripped the rail. My knees ached. But I climbed. I passed one hallway, then another. Finally, the 3rd floor. This level wasn't like the others. There were no framed prints, no flower vases on corner tables. Just cinder-block walls painted hospital white and long fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The carpet was gone, replaced by scuffed linoleum streaked with mop water. At the end of the hallway was a metal door marked service access, staff only, just like the note said. And beside it, standing in shadow, was Wendell. He looked smaller at night. Not frilier, just more compact. Like a man who had been storing his strength for too long and was ready to let it out in one perfect act. You came, he said. I nodded. Barely. He didn't ask what I meant. He knew. We didn't have to speak about the pills, the questions, the way Clarice had started looking at me like she was preparing a file to close. He pulled a lanyard from his coat pocket. A staff badge. Where did you get that? I asked. I've had it for months. Belonged to an assistant administrator who transferred out last spring. They forgot to deactivate the badge. He swiped it. The lock clicked. The door opened. Inside was a long corridor lined with crates, bins, and old equipment. It smelled like old paper and damp cardboard. The lights flickered once, then steadied. We don't have much time, he said. This hallway leads to the rear access elevator. It goes straight down to the loading dock. It's rarely used at night, only during linen shipments. My heart beat louder than our footsteps. Once we're out, I said, "Where do we go?" "I've got a contact. A journalist. She's been chasing stories like this: quiet elder abuse, estate manipulation, false medical holds. She knows the law won't be enough. But if we give her the files, the story, the pattern." He paused. "And you, Marjorie. You're the perfect voice. Respected. Sane. Angry in the right direction." I stopped walking. A sound. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Not from behind us, but ahead. Wendell heard them too. He motioned me back. Then a voice called out, male, firm, and laced with performance. "I believe you've lost your way, Mrs. Vane. Dr. Trent." He stepped out from the end of the hallway, holding a clipboard like it was a weapon. Behind him were 2 security staff. Not guards. Not in uniform. Just men with the bulk and posture of enforcers. "Please," he said. "There's no need for this. You're confused. You've been under strain." "I'm not confused," I said, louder than I intended. "You drugged me." He tilted his head like a father humoring a stubborn child. "We gave you medication that your daughter authorized, for your protection. This is all very sad, Mrs. Vane. But you're not well." He stepped forward. I stepped back. And Wendell, God bless him, stepped in front of me. "You touch her," he said, "and you'll have more than a medical scandal. You'll have names, files, records. We're not the only ones." For a moment, it worked. The doctor hesitated. But then he smiled. "We'll see." He nodded to the men. They moved fast. Too fast for Wendell to stop both. One grabbed me. The other grabbed him. And just like that, we were dragged apart. The service hallway faded behind me. The light, the map, the freedom, gone. Back in my room, they injected something into my arm. I fought them, screamed, bit one of their hands. But it didn't matter. The sedative was too strong. The room spun. My vision blurred. The last thing I saw before the dark took me was Clarice standing in the corner, expression unreadable, hands folded, watching like someone who'd just witnessed the quiet end of a story no one would ever read. Waking up was different this time. Not like the groggy mornings before, where my body ached and my mind simply lagged behind. No, this time, waking felt like clawing out of wet sand. I could hear the world before I could see it. The faint hum of overhead lights. The soft mechanical whir of a vent. My own breath too loud, too shallow. And voices. Muffled. Not in the room, but just beyond. "She's stabilized," said one. A man. Calm. Controlled. "She was agitated," said another. A woman. Clipped. Almost defensive. We had no choice. Then the soft thud of retreating steps. I opened my eyes to find myself back in my room. Blanket folded. Slippers at the foot of the bed. A tray of untouched oatmeal on the table. Everything in its place. Except me. My head throbbed, my arms were bruised, and my throat was dry as bone. But the worst part wasn't the pain. It was the silence. They were waiting for me to break. To forget. To accept. But I didn't. Not this time. I turned my head slowly, every muscle stiff, and spotted something new on my nightstand. A sealed envelope. No name. No label. My pulse quickened. I reached for it with shaking fingers, tearing it open as carefully as I could. Inside was a single photograph. Black and white. Grainy. Clearly taken from a security feed. It showed me and Wendell in the archive room. And scrawled on the back, in handwriting that wasn't his, but wasn't staff either, were 5 words. "You're not alone. Keep going." I stared at those words for a long time. Not because they were dramatic. Not because they were elegant. But because they meant someone else had seen. Someone inside this place was watching. Not like the staff. Not like Eloise. Someone who still had eyes and a mind and a spine. It wasn't Wendell. I knew his handwriting. This was feminine. Sharp, tight, written in a rush, but legible. It could have been a nurse, an orderly, even someone pretending to be asleep in the room next to mine. Someone else who knew this facility didn't care about healing. Someone who'd seen the hallway, the injections, the decisions made behind clipboards and closed doors. I wasn't out. I wasn't safe. But I wasn't invisible. And that meant I had something left. Time. Not measured by clocks or schedules, but in chances. Moments. Cracks in their structure. They had tried to sedate me into silence. But now I knew. Someone had seen me fight. And someone wanted me to win. I kept the photo hidden behind the dresser, folded carefully and sealed in an old tissue packet. It smelled faintly of rose water from the last perfume I'd been allowed to bring with me, and for some reason, that smell made me feel stronger. Like I was still a woman, not a patient. Like I was still someone. That morning, I returned to routine. Not because I wanted to, but because routine was the best camouflage. I smiled when Brenda brought my toast, asked about the weather even though I couldn't see the sky, and nodded politely at the young nurse who now escorted me everywhere. Her name was Lena. She was newer than the others. Too new, in fact, barely older than Eloise had been the first time she lied to a teacher. Lena moved differently than the others. Less rehearsed. Her eyes darted quickly, like she was always measuring who might be listening. It wasn't until the third time she came to my room that I noticed it, an ink smudge on her right hand. Faint. The kind you only get from a fountain pen. And I remembered the handwriting on the photograph. Sharp, tight, rushed. My hands shook slightly as I handed back my breakfast tray, more from nerves than age. "Thank you, Lena," I said softly. She blinked. "You're welcome, Mrs. Vane." I leaned in just a touch and whispered, "You're not the first one to smuggle something in here." Her eyes widened. Her throat bobbed. But she said nothing, just gathered the tray and left. Later that afternoon, I found a second envelope tucked beneath my pillow. This time, not a photo, just a note. There's a logbook. South Wing. Records room. They use it to track every dose, every decision, every name. Get it? Copy it. Don't let them catch you. No signature. I stared at the paper for a long time, then folded it into my sleeve and leaned back in my chair like nothing had happened. The South Wing. I hadn't been allowed there since the first week. They said it was under renovation, another lie. I would need to act quickly, quietly. I couldn't ask Wendell. He was still missing. Possibly isolated. Maybe worse. But I could use Lena. I waited until evening rounds. When she came in with her usual grace and clipboard, I asked, "Lena, have you ever wondered why this south hallway is always locked?" She froze. Then she said, too calmly, I was told it's for storage. You and I both know that's not true. She met my gaze then. Full on. No deflection. No polite distance. What's in there? I pressed. She looked toward the door, then stepped closer and whispered, "Records. Paper ones. They haven't digitized everything yet." "And the logbook?" She hesitated. "Then, it has signatures. Dosage records. Staff approvals. Some of them don't add up." My heart thudded. "Can you get me in?" "No," she said quickly. "But I can leave a key. 10 minutes. No more." She left without saying another word. That night, when I opened my drawer, I found it. A brass key, marked with a small piece of red thread. The same kind used to bind the folders I'd seen in the archive. My fingers closed around it. They thought they'd drugged me into submission. That I was docile now. Manageable. But I had something stronger than pills or protocols. I had Eloise. And tomorrow night, I'd have proof. I didn't sleep that night, not even for a minute. I laid in bed, eyes open to the dark, watching the faint shadow of the door under the corridor light. Every 10 minutes, footsteps passed. Shoes soft, measured. The night nurse, making her rounds. I counted 3 passes. Then the pattern reset. It was always the same. At exactly 1:43 a.m., I moved. The brass key was cold in my hand as I slipped out of the room and padded down the east hallway, heart pounding so loudly I thought it might alert the staff on the floor below. I had memorized Lena's directions like scripture, past the janitor's closet, past the staff break room, then left, door marked B-Wing utility. I found it. The key turned easily. And just like that, I stepped into the south wing, the place I hadn't seen in weeks, the part of the facility that existed only in shadows and excuses. It smelled different here. Stale. Neglected. There was dust on the baseboards. Light bulbs flickered instead of glowing. The air was too still, too quiet. I followed the dim hallway until I reached the end. A thick door with a sliding panel of frosted glass. On the wall beside it, a small metal plaque. Archival medication logs. 2007. Present I entered. The room inside was windowless, filled with filing cabinets so tall and wide they nearly scraped the ceiling. Folders were stacked in boxes, labeled by patient ID numbers, not names. The only light came from a single desk lamp, buzzing faintly, casting long shadows across the floor. And there it was. The logbook. Thick. Bound in cracked red leather. Left lying out, open to the current week. I flipped back through its pages with trembling fingers, my eyes scanning for anything marked with my ID number. It didn't take long. Vane, M. 241, LK April 6th. Risperidone, 0. 25 milligrams, evening April 7th. Risperidone, 0. 5 milligrams, evening April 8th. Risperidone, 1 milligram, evening. Uncooperative behavior reported. Note filed by Dr. Trent. April 9th. Additional dosage administered. Unlisted. Sedative. April 10th. Observation status extended. Restriction recommended. I flipped harder, scanning not just mine, but others. Names I didn't recognize, but numbers that repeated. Doses increasing rapidly. No physician signatures. No legal guardian notations. Just adjustments. Quiet, precise, unauthorized adjustments. Then I saw it, something scrawled in the margin of one of the older entries, written in small, panic script. They're not forgetful. They're drugged. A cold chill swept up my spine. This wasn't just about me. This was a system. A well-oiled, carefully constructed system designed to take everything from the residents, their money, their clarity, their names. And no one was watching. Except us. I grabbed the portable scanner Lena had stashed under the desk, smart girl, and fed every page through. I moved quickly, quietly. 15 minutes. That was the window. I had to be gone before the nurse looped back around again. As I packed the scanner and turned to leave, I froze. A figure stood in the doorway. Not Lena. Clarice. She didn't speak. Just looked at me with something I couldn't decipher. Not anger. Not shock. Resignation. I wondered how long it would take you, she said finally. My throat tightened. You knew. I read the letter you sent your lawyer, she said softly. I read it twice. Then I checked the files. I checked the signatures. She looked down. And I saw how deep it goes. I stared at her, too stunned to speak. I can't help you outright, she said, stepping into the room. But I didn't tell Dr. Trent you'd left your room tonight. And I won't. Take what you need. Then disappear. Disappear? I asked. Her gaze turned hard. Do you think they'll let you testify? They'll call you unstable. They'll bring up your age, your memory. You need to go public before they lock you in again. She stepped aside, letting me pass. I didn't thank her. There was no time. I ran. Back through the hallway. Down the corridor. Into my room. I slid the scanner into the hollow of the mattress and lay down just in time to hear footsteps outside my door. A light knock. Then silence. No one entered. They didn't know yet. And when they did, it would be too late. By morning, I had the scanner disassembled, wrapped in an old sweater and hidden deep in the laundry bin that would be picked up by Lena's shift. She'd know what to do with it, she had to. If she didn't, then everything I had risked would die in silence, like so many voices here already had. The red leather logbook stayed in the records room. I couldn't carry it without drawing suspicion, but the scanned files were enough. Every dosage, every forged adjustment, every name. All of it cataloged, page by damning page. I wasn't nervous anymore. I had moved past fear into something clearer resolve. I knew what I had to do next, even if it broke something in me permanently. I had to face Eloise. There had been no calls from her in days. No visits. Not since the injection. Not since I'd acted out, as the nurses would say in their clipped, passive tones. I knew what that meant. She was waiting to see if the sedation had worked. If I had been reset, reduced, rubbed out, and I would let her believe it, just long enough to lower her guard. So I requested a call. I want to speak with my daughter, I told Clarice that afternoon, my voice low and tired, just enough of a tremble to seem safe. She hesitated, of course she did, but eventually nodded. I'll schedule a video call. Tomorrow morning. I'll notify her staff. I didn't ask if Eloise had staff now. I didn't have to. I already knew. That night, Lena delivered a fresh towel set. Tucked inside was a phone, slim, old, nothing flashy. No lock screen. Just a small piece of paper taped to the back with a handwritten message. Everything sent. It's out now. Press record. I held it in my palm for a long time. No messages. No apps. Just one tool and one chance. And still, as I lay in bed that night, I felt the weight of everything I'd lost pressing against my chest. My home. My freedom. My trust. But most of all, I missed the little girl who used to braid her doll's hair beside the fire, who ran to me after every nightmare and whispered, "Mama, I'm safe now." That little girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who saw me as an obstacle. A legacy to inherit, not a mother to protect. The next morning, I dressed carefully. I wore the pearl earrings Edward gave me after our 10th anniversary. The cardigan I'd been saving for the day I left this place for good. I brushed my hair until it gleamed like frost and pinched my cheeks for color. When the call came through, Clarice wheeled the screen into my room and stepped back, silent, her face unreadable. The monitor flickered. And there she was. Eloise. Impeccably dressed in a navy blouse, minimal makeup, her expression a mix of concern and calculation. "Mama," she said sweetly, "you look so much better." I was worried after. Everything. I smiled. "I know, darling. It's been a hard few weeks. I hope you're not holding anything against me," she said. "This place is only doing what's best for you." I nodded gently. "Of course." And then, while she kept speaking, I pressed record on the phone hidden under the blanket on my lap. I let her talk. Let her explain, justify, correct. She said just enough. More than she realized. She spoke about the trust, how it was safely redirected. About the medication, how necessary interventions had to happen for your own good. And then gold. "Once this legal nonsense settles," she said, "I'll have full control of the estate, and you won't need to worry about any of it. You can just rest, Mama. That's what you wanted, right?" I looked at her on the screen. That was when I saw it, my own reflection in her face. Not the tenderness. Not the kindness. The coldness. The control. I had built this legacy. I had built her. And now she was using everything I taught her against me. When the call ended, I said nothing. I handed Clarice the tablet and watched her wheel it away. Then I turned to the window, the one that didn't open, the one with the false view, and whispered, "It's done." I sent the audio file to Walter Finch that night using Lena's burner phone. I labeled it simply, "For the court." And then I sat in silence, no longer unsure. They could try to sedate me again. They could try to spin stories and stack papers. But this time, I wasn't alone. The records were out. The tape was out. And so was I. They told me she was on her way before breakfast. Clarice entered my room with a clipboard tucked too tightly against her chest and the hint of tension in her mouth that even her best nurse's smile couldn't hide. "Your daughter will be arriving this morning," she said. "She's requested a private meeting. No staff present." I nodded calmly and set down my teacup. I imagine she has. There was no mention of the phone call. No questions about what I might have said or recorded. Clarice knew better. She had made her choice the moment she let me walk free from the archives. Now she was balancing on the edge like the rest of us, watching, waiting, unsure of which side would collapse first. The facility was quieter than usual that morning. No group therapy. No hallway music. Even the coffee in the common room had gone cold. Silence moves through institutions like weather. Invisible, heavy, always a warning. At 9:03 a.m., she arrived. I didn't need to look. I heard her heels on the tile before I saw her. Eloise walked into my room wearing a gray blazer and a silk scarf I hadn't seen in years, one that used to belong to me. Her makeup was perfect. Her eyes sharp. She looked more like a CEO than a daughter, but that was who she'd become. And for the first time in months, I didn't flinch when I looked at her. "Mama," she said, closing the door behind her. "You've made quite a mess." I smiled faintly. "That's funny. I was just thinking the same thing." She pulled out a chair, didn't ask if she could sit. She leaned forward, hands clasped tightly, and gave me the look she used to give her interns when they fumbled instructions. "Walter Finch has been calling everyone. The trust lawyers. The media. Even your accountant." "Then he's been busy," I said, folding my hands in my lap. "You sent him something. Something dangerous." "I sent him the truth." Her jaw clenched. "The truth is relative, Mother. Especially when it comes from someone whose mental stability is in question." I didn't blink. "I'm of sound mind." "I always was. You just couldn't risk that being proven." "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "No, Eloise," I said gently. "You made it hard the moment you turned motherhood into a power grab." She looked away, just for a second. That was her tell. Always had been. "I protected the family name," she said quietly. "I saved us from scandal." "You were spiraling. I was grieving. I cut in." "Not spiraling. You used my mourning as your leverage. You silenced me so you could inherit early. And now that I've remembered who I am, you're panicking." "Do you think anyone will believe you?" she snapped, voice low and dangerous now. "Do you think the courts will listen to an old woman who claims her own daughter is a thief? Who smuggles contraband, forges friendships with orderlies, and breaks into locked rooms?" I let the silence sit between us. Then I said, "I don't have to convince the courts. I just had to get the files to the right people. People who still believe voices like mine matter." I leaned forward, slow and deliberate. "And I recorded our last conversation. That did it." Her face drained of color. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "You what?" "I sent it to Walter. And to the press. Your exact words, Eloise. Every soft threat, every confession wrapped in concern. You handed me the nail for your own coffin. You thought you were untouchable." "You won't survive this," she whispered. "You think they'll let you out?" "They'll put you under a tighter hold. You'll be evaluated again." They can try," I said. "But the story is already out. The scanner files. The medication logs. The list of residents who were drugged and discredited." I stood then, slower than her, but taller in spirit. "You tried to rewrite my ending, Eloise. But you forgot one thing." Her voice shook when she finally asked it. "What?" "I taught you how to win. But I never taught you what to do when the person you buried starts digging." She stared at me, and for the first time in her adult life, I saw it. Fear. Not of the courts. Not of the scandal. Of me. She stood quickly, straightened her scarf. Her composure cracked just a little at the corner of her mouth. "You've destroyed this family," she said bitterly. "No," I replied. "I've saved what's left of it." She left without another word. And I, Marjorie Vane, who had once been forgotten, sat back down in my chair, hands steady, gaze forward, finally ready for the rest of the world to hear my voice. Faces the public, the press, and the reckoning long overdue? It started with a voicemail. A staff member, I never learned her name, entered my room just before lunch and handed me the facility's shared tablet. She didn't make eye contact, didn't speak. Just placed it in my lap and left as quickly as she'd come. The screen blinked with a new message from Walter Finch. I pressed play. Marjorie, you've opened a floodgate. The audio's been verified. The medication logs are real. We've filed an injunction against the facility's management team, and the Department of Elder Affairs is launching an internal investigation. I've already been contacted by 2 reporters, the Times and the Post. They want to talk to you. Not as a victim, as a witness. I listened to it twice. The second time, I let myself cry. Quietly, without shame. The way you cry when something finally breaks in your favor. The kind of cry that comes after weeks of silence and doubt and planning in the dark. I pressed a napkin to my eyes, straightened my cardigan, and prepared myself. Because this was only the beginning. By the next day, the changes had already started. Subtle, but unmistakable. The music in the hallways stopped. The smiling, chatty nurses disappeared, replaced by tense, unfamiliar faces. And the morning check-ins? Gone. No more pre-approved questions. No more clipboard reassurances. Clarice didn't come in for 2 days. When she did, she sat in the corner of my room with her ID badge removed and hands clasped like a schoolgirl waiting to be scolded. I don't know how much longer I'll be here, she said. A lawyer came in yesterday. They've started asking questions about sedation records. I'm sorry, I told her. And I meant it. She had helped me. Quietly, carefully, in her own way, she had pushed against the tide. But the tide was shifting now, and people like Clarice weren't built for storms. You should leave, I said softly. You've done your part. She nodded. They're going to call you soon. Walter arranged a press briefing. They want your statement. A briefing, I repeated, almost amused. And what exactly am I supposed to say? That you survived, she said. That they didn't break you. The call came that evening. I sat up in bed, hair brushed, cardigan buttoned, earrings in. Lena stayed with me, standing just outside the camera's view. Her presence made me feel stronger. Not because I needed protection, but because I wasn't alone anymore. I was seen. The screen flickered on. 2 reporters. A legal rep, and Walter. I took a deep breath, smiled into the lens, and said, My name is Marjorie Vane. I am 76 years old. I was once the matriarch of a respected estate, a mother, a wife, a philanthropist, and for the last 6 months, I've been a prisoner in a facility built to silence people like me. I told them everything. About the missing will, the false reports, the forced medication, the red leather logbook, the hallway with no clocks. I spoke not just for myself, but for the other voices I had met here. The quiet man in the garden. The women who no longer remembered their last names, but remembered fear. Wendell. The nurse who wrote, They're not forgetful, they're drugged. I spoke until my throat hurt, and the call ended in a hush of stunned silence. When the screen went dark, Lena whispered, You sounded like a queen. I smiled at that, because once I had been, and now, finally, I was again. Later that night, as I sat staring out at the reflectionless window, I thought about Eloise, about the trial she would now face, the headlines, the legal reversals, the questions from people who once praised her. I wondered if she'd remember the little girl who braided her doll's hair, or if that part of her was gone forever. The day they told me I was free, it rained. Not a hard, dramatic rain, the kind poets love. This was soft, persistent, quiet. The sort of rain that taps gently on windows and slips into the cracks of everything, like it's trying to remind the world that nothing stays sealed forever. Fitting, I thought. Lena was the one who gave me the news. She entered the room, my room for the last time, with a small smile and the same dignity she'd always shown me. No fanfare, no dramatics. They've signed the release, she said. Walter's waiting downstairs. the cars out front. I looked around, at the pale blue walls, the bookshelf still full of unread books, the chair where I had sat for days on end, building my war in silence, the mattress with the hollow pocket that had once hidden my proof, my voice. There was nothing here for me now, nothing but memory and ghosts. Still, I stood slowly, savoring the moment. I adjusted the collar of my coat, smoothed my skirt, and ran one last finger across the dresser's edge, not to say goodbye, but to mark the moment. Then I walked out. No one stopped me. No one said a word. In the lobby, Walter stood with a black umbrella and a single manila folder clutched in his hand. His expression softened when he saw me. "You're early," I said. I wasn't going to risk being late. Outside, the rain kissed the pavement in a steady rhythm. He opened the umbrella over us, shielding me as we walked to the car. The driver opened the door for me. I paused at the threshold. That door meant more than just leaving. It meant stepping into the world not as someone who survived, but as someone who had one. Not despite her age, not in spite of the odds, but because she remembered who she was and made the world remember, too. As I settled into the seat, Walter handed me the folder. "Thought you might want to see it." Inside were copies of the official reports. State opens investigation into elder guardianship abuses. Private facility faces scrutiny over patient drugging. Daughter charged with manipulation of trust and medical documents. But there, at the very bottom of the pile, was one more clipping. From the Post. A quote pulled from my interview. They tried to silence her. Instead, she gave voice to hundreds. I closed the folder, leaned my head back, and watched the rain streak across the window. Walter asked, "Where to now?" I smiled. "Home." He hesitated. "You mean?" "Yes," I said. "I want to see it. I want to walk those halls again. The ones she tried to claim. It may not be easy. Nothing worth remembering ever is." As the car pulled away from the facility, I thought of Wendell. I still didn't know what had become of him. If he'd been moved. If he'd been silenced. But I would find out. I had names now. Connections. A voice. I had time left. And I intended to use every second. Because this is what they forget about women like me. We don't go quietly. We go deliberately. And when we walk back through the doors they tried to close behind us, we leave them open for the rest to follow.